Sejam todos bem-vindos de volta. Esperamos que tenham aproveitado o nosso intervalo, que também tenham aproveitado o conteúdo do nosso evento até agora. Nós vamos voltar, então, com a programação do FIT 2021.
We cannot keep repeating the same mistakes in global tax and expecting different results. The OECD is a club of rich countries, primarily, and it works for those members, including the largest and most powerful economies. That's fine for them, but it doesn't work for anyone else, including the countries that might want to tax those countries' multinationals. So we need to shift the forum. We need finally to deliver a UN framework convention on tax that will set the basis for an intergovernmental tax body under UN auspices at the United Nations to negotiate the next round of reforms, if there's to be any hope of those reforms being genuinely inclusive, somewhat transparent, and delivering a fairer outcome. And lastly, as the high-level FACTI panel has recommended, we also need a UN Centre for Monitoring Taxing Rights. So we have the data that we need in the public domain year on year, allowing us to see and hold accountable those jurisdictions that are responsible for imposing tax losses, both corporate tax losses and losses due to anonymous offshore holdings on everyone else. All of the losses that undermine our attempts to fight inequalities and to raise up human rights. The last thing I'll say is simply to draw attention to some tools that we have for this. The Financial Secrecy Index we publish every 2 years, identifying the most opaque jurisdictions, the least cooperative jurisdictions, currently with the Cayman Islands, the United States, and Switzerland as the top 3. The Corporate Tax Haven Index, which we publish in the every other year in between, which focuses on those jurisdictions that really go after profit-shifting corporate tax abuses. And then the Illicit Financial Flows Vulnerability Tracker that brings the indexes into play to create granular measures for policy prioritization at the national level. All of these we also bring together and publish, along with estimates of the revenue losses that countries suffer and the revenue losses they impose on others in the State of Tax Justice report. Last year's was the inaugural report. This year we publish on the 16th of November. And again, it will bring these statistics all up to date once again. Let me finish there. I'm looking forward to comments and questions. And again, thank you very much.
Obrigado, senhor Alex Governham. E eu peço agora para fazer os comentários o Mark Morgan, que é professor da Universidade de Genebra, especialista em tributação e desigualdade e também coordenador do World Inequality Lab. Eu peço apenas para o Mark fazer um comentário de apenas 10 minutos, porque devemos terminar às 13 horas e ainda temos perguntas, pelo menos uma ou duas perguntas da plateia. Então, please, Mark Morgan, I ask you to reduce your debate for 10 minutes, please. Okay? You can start.
Can you hear me? Great. Okay. First of all, thank you for the invitation to intervene in this conference. I had previous experiences with this type of conference, and it's an excellent initiative. And thank you also to Alex for his really neat presentation of the issues at hand, both on the problems and on the policy agenda that is currently being discussed. So I would just like to raise a few remarks based on Alex's presentation. I do agree with practically everything he said and the way he framed it. The alternatives, especially the call at the end to move away from the OECD framework and more to an integrative UN framework. in dealing with tax justice issues. On the case of identifying the problems, I would just make a remark regarding Brazil, an example of Brazil, which I know well. And the argument that, in the case of direct tax, it's progressive, and when you take into account indirect taxes, that's when you get the regressivity overall. Now, as we know, as research has been published by myself and others on this issue, even in the direct tax front in countries like Brazil, but not only Brazil, in many other countries, the rate of progressivity of the income tax and the direct tax in general actually falls at the very, very top once you get into the really high income groups. And this is a problem, because this is a problem for the argument that says, oh, well, look, this is our income. We're contributing more than everyone else in the distribution. Therefore, we should have more of a claim on, what is done with the money, et cetera, et cetera. But this actually breaks down when we really see the true data that often the official statistics don't reveal. And we have to go digging and combining different sorts of data to be able to, show that actually at the very top, effective tax rates are falling. So you get more of a, rather than a straight line that Alex showed in the study he cited, it's more like an upward sloping line, and then it dips quite dramatically at the end. So, I mean, this is a major issue. And when we're talking about direct tax systems and improving the progressivity of direct tax systems, I think, this type of profile, getting from, a straight line and a hunched at the end to a perfectly straight line, as close as it can be to a straight line, is absolutely necessary. And I think for this, there are 3 principles that I think should be followed when designing a direct tax system. The broad principle of simplicity, I think, is absolutely crucial. A simple tax system, a simple direct tax system that everyone can understand, that is transparent, and that is built upon two sub-principles. So that of the principle of horizontal equity and vertical equity. So Alex talked a lot, or showed us visually, what vertical equity should look like, which is that upward sloping line. The higher your income, the higher your wealth, the greater share of your income or wealth that you should pay in tax. But horizontal equity is equally important and can determine, the effectiveness, how vertically equitable your tax system is. So horizontal equity is basically treating all types of income and all types of wealth assets equally. So not discriminating, and applying different tax rates, different tax schedules to different incomes or different wealth. And that's the main problem in Brazil that everyone in the audience knows about. The exemptions on certain types of income, which are especially important for top income groups, such as profits, distributed profits and dividends, is something that prevents the system from being sufficiently progressive. So not discriminating against different forms of income or wealth, and making sure that you have vertical equity in place. I think that's crucial. And simplicity in this comes in proposals that really frame the income tax, or if you want to put a wealth tax, in terms that everyone can understand. Because at the moment, the way tax systems are organized on the basis of marginal rates with thresholds they're public knowledge, everyone knows, but it's very hard to calculate or to pinpoint where exactly one is, or how much tax eventually one is paying, with any proposal based on marginal rates. So I think we should simplify, and there's proposals that we made with Pedro on this front, for Brazil regarding income taxes, regarding specifically wealth and inheritance taxes. So I think that's absolutely crucial. I would make a final remark on the international scene and what countries can do, giving profit shifting, tax evasion, and room for multilateral collaboration. So I agree with everything Alex has said here. I would only add that, even if there is a difficulty in reaching multilateral agreement, that countries can bilaterally act themselves in imposing tax on even multinational corporate profits, based on the type of formula that Alex was talking about. So fractioning on the basis of sales that are made in the country, or a mixture of sales and employees or physical capital in the country. So even large countries like Brazil, I think, have a lot of room to act, and even regional coalitions would be even better of countries in Latin America to act. So it's not strictly necessary that we need to wait for everyone to sit down and to reach a consensus on these issues. That's going to be difficult, but unilateral action from individual and economically important countries, applying economic sanctions to tax havens regarding trade and other banning of certain licenses, banking licenses, other service licenses, etc., could be a very effective way of moving forward while we wait to get that multilateral agreement through. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. So, nós temos pouco tempo, né? Planeja-se terminar às 13 horas, então não vai ter pergunta da audiência, infelizmente. But I ask Mrs. Gobham to comment Mark remarks, please, in 5 minutes.
Thank you. And thanks, Mark. I very much appreciate your comments. And look, I think you've picked out a set of points there. The principles you mentioned, absolutely. The point about treating different types of income and wealth the same way is an absolutely fundamental one, and one which, again, pretty much every country in the world fails on, and which, unsurprisingly, is exploited most at the top end of the income and wealth distributions. We have some optimism that the efforts of the Biden administration on this particular question may provide some impetus to other countries, while on the corporate tax side, they're probably part of the problem as much as part of the solution. But it's certainly a central point. Looking at the corporate income tax question, I think that's a really important point. One thing that we've seen that's been very positive in the current round of OECD talks is that lower income countries outside the OECD and some OECD members have joined together in a way that the OECD has always tried to prevent happening, precisely because it's potentially powerful. So you had the G24 intergovernmental group of countries, the countries that work with the African Tax Administrators Forum, and countries in the South Centre, all in different ways, using their own forums to come to considered positions. Now, that's ultimately been pretty unsuccessful in terms of putting any leverage on the OECD. And it's very frustrating to see countries, the countries that actually refused to sign the statement earlier this month, Nigeria, Kenya, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, countries with about 500 million people, but written off by the OECD as just 4 members of 140. To see them and their concerns getting less consideration than the concerns of Ireland or Hungary seeking to defend their own tax haven models is very frustrating. But the way that groups have come together to table proposals, particularly the G24, has been consistent throughout, often working with their own G20 member countries who have greater economic clout. It's been very encouraging. So I think there is a possibility that everyone more or less signed up this month because they had to. The threat of various threats from the OECD and the threats of trade sanctions from the US made it very difficult for anyone to join those 4 countries, and we should salute those 4 for having the bravery to take that stand. But we have seen the seeds sown for countries to move together in regional groupings or in any of those cross-regional groupings, and to start to take unilateral measures. This whole process only moved because the US and its multinationals were concerned about unilateral DSTs, digital services taxes, the kind of measures they've also tried to exclude, like the equalization levy in India, but also Nigeria's significant economic presence measure that is much broader and raises very significant revenue, much more than they'd get if they had to give it up and adopt the OECD proposals. they provide a way forward, and that can be unilateral or it can be in regional groups. But either way, it can be done with the cover of knowing that others are doing the same thing. And I think particularly something like the Nigerian model, which it's almost impossible to see how the US could raise a trade complaint against it because it is by design non-discriminatory, gives you a way forward that doesn't immediately lead to you being kind of beaten up by a superpower. So I think that's crucial. I think we'll see over the next 6 to 9 months, pretty soon, whether or not the OECD and its major members are willing to move and provide something that's at least a bit less unfair, a bit less punitive in effect than what they've got on the table, or we're going to see these processes moving forward. At the minute, there is a discussion about upgrading the UN Tax Committee, and that could be the first step to a genuinely intergovernmental negotiation under UN auspices. That could move as soon as the General Assembly Second Committee begins its discussions next week. So lots of things moving there, and for once, we may feel quite positive about what are, on the face of it, a pretty terrible set of OECD proposals.
Ok, muito obrigado. Eu quero agradecer ao senhor Gobham e também ao Mark Morgan e à senhora Ghosh. E muito obrigado a todos que acompanharam até aqui e conto em breve com vocês nas próximas sessões. Ok, tchau.
Thank you.
Nós agradecemos também ao Pedro, claro, por coordenar todas as discussões e também aos palestrantes. Lembrando que os desafios são grandes, sim, mas as oportunidades certamente existem para avançarmos nessa agenda que é tão importante. Agora nós vamos fazer o intervalo de 1 hora para o almoço, e lembrando que o nosso evento está sendo gravado e será transmitido pelas redes sociais dos nossos realizadores e apoiadores, que são FENAFISCO, ANFIP, Oxfam Brasil, ISP e Sinafresp. Portanto, divulguem para que mais pessoas possam assistir a esse conteúdo tão relevante. E, desde já, todos estão convidados para visitar a Livraria do Fisco no nosso estande virtual do Fórum, que fica na nossa plataforma. Vocês podem encontrar publicações e vídeos relacionados aos temas que estão sendo abordados hoje.